In one of my earlier videos, I presented about the introduction section, but in this video, I'll focus more on mastering the discussion section because the two, the introduction and the discussion section, are the most important parts to better understand because of their difficulties, and there are some similarities and differences between the two also. So having, creating a compelling discussion section is really crucial for the success of your scientific manuscript in terms of publishing it and reaching a broader audience base. So this guide will help you navigate its complexities with 5 simple steps. Before I delve deeper into the discussion, I'd like to also mention the difference and similarities between the introduction and discussion. There is some synchrony between the two, so that's crucial. So the introduction and the discussion function as a pair. Now, whatever you have said in the discussion section has to be reflected also. Whatever you have said in the introduction section has to be reflected in the discussion section. So many elements of the introduction section are used in the discussion, but they are used in a reverse order, which means you start with in the introduction, you start with a broader topic introduction, and you narrow it down to the objective. But here, what you do is you start with your key findings, and then you broaden it into the conclusion section. So the discussion is apparently this is the most difficult section to write, whether you are experienced or a novice, because this is where you make some interpretation, something which requires more analytic thinking. The other sections, especially the methods and the results section, they are already agreed and discussed, presented in a way that the study has been conducted, so you can't change it. But in the discussion, you are making your own interpretation of the results. So that's why it's more difficult to write. And the main function of the discussion is to answer the research question that has been posed in the introduction. And it explains what the results mean and what contribution the paper is really making in the study area. In the discussion, you also explain how you arrived at the conclusion. So this, differences and similarities between the discussion and the introduction are important to understand. Okay, so the discussion is not a haphazard mix of paragraphs and words and some statements. Rather, it's a well-structured piece of writing. So there are 5 steps or group of sections here that you find in the discussion section. And the first part is the first paragraph. It summarizes the key findings. You do not restate, the results as they were written in the results section, but you have to rephrase them and present in a more legible way. For instance, if your result gives, a hazard ratio of 0.7 with some 95% confidence interval, you don't have to write the whole result here, but you have to show it in a more understandable way, like as a 30% reduction in the risk, for example. And then you don't have to really state the 95% confidence interval and p-values. Those things should be presented in the result. But here, make it clearer. Don't put too much, numbers here. But restate, summarize them in a more understandable way. It should be understandable to the non-specialist when you come to this section of the writing. Then in the second paragraph, so that you may summarize the first, the key findings in one paragraph, but sometimes it may go also to 2 paragraphs, for example. It doesn't really matter as long as you can summarize it. And then you go to the second paragraph where you interpret the key findings. You summarize them, then you have to provide the essential interpretation based on these key findings. And when you do that, you have to also substantiate it with some supporting evidence. So you have summarized the key findings, and then you say, this means this. What does it imply? What are the implications of these key findings? So you have to write that in the second paragraph. Of course, you can make it second and third, paragraph. There's no restriction on the number of paragraphs here, but let's take this as one strong paragraph that interprets the key findings. Okay, that's the second part. And then you go to the third part where you start comparing and contrasting your findings with previous studies. If there are differences between your finding and the ones found by other similar studies, you have to discuss them here. If there are similarities, if they concur with previous findings, then you have to say so. So this is the main problem. In most papers, what I see is a mere comparison and contrasting of your study findings with previous studies. That's not the main purpose of the study. You have to start with a summary of the main findings. You have to interpret before you go into comparing and contrasting. You will do that. So people start mentioning countries, a couple of researchers, and things this and that, then they think that discussion is talking about what others have done. Discussion is about your results, and you make the right comparison with previous studies in the appropriate section, which is the third paragraph. So this can be third paragraph and can go to 3, 4 paragraphs. It doesn't matter. But the main purpose is to compare and show. If there is a major departure from previous findings, you have to explain them here. And there should be, good reasoning behind this. And this is what differentiates a good researcher from others. Because if you don't know the differences, what caused these differences, then you don't have anything to interpret. Also remember that when you write manuscripts, usually you write this as part of a team, and sometimes people don't understand in your own team. Even after doing the study, people still may be confused. So if you are the primary writer, or if you are the senior writer, then it becomes your responsibility to explain these things and also help the other people understand it. So the third paragraph is comparison. The fourth one is about limitations. In this section, you have to highlight the major limitations of your study. You have to say it. If there have been some weaknesses, if there have been some confounders, if your sample size has been smaller, if there has been some problem with the completeness of your data, any missing information, anything really that might have affected your results should be discussed here. There should also be a fair balance between limitations and the strengths. And you have to also say something about the strength of your study. If yours is the largest study ever, then say so. If yours is the first randomized controlled trial, you have to state that. Any unique strength of your paper has to come here. And if you have also found some unexpected and good results, or if the results have been contrary to what you have expected, then you have to also discuss them here and try to provide some explanations based on your thinking. And finally, and the last paragraph is a conclusion. And the interesting thing about the conclusion is that it's very similar to the second paragraph. You go back to the second paragraph, but in an expanded form. Therefore, here what you do is summarizing the hypothesis and the purpose of the study. Now you are reminding everybody about things that you have said in the introduction section. And then you have to highlight the significance of the study here. And the last thing you have to do is you have to discuss any unanswered questions. You can't answer everything in your study. Assure them that there are many more questions that are coming, and this is an invitation for other people to join and do more research in this area. Therefore, in this section, you also highlight the potential questions for future research, and that should be very explicit. You have to state exactly what question you are recommending, so that others can easily pick this and proceed forward. So the discussion section is structured into 5 simple steps, and anything outside this is an extra. You can say a few other things, so this is not a dogma, but this is a guide and a step to this. I will give you a few more examples. If you don't want to look at the examples, that's also fine, but there are some examples from my own paper that I will show you how we wrote this. This was written many years ago, but still very valid. So in this study, this was HEART is a HIV treatment, the highly effective antiretroviral treatment. Now it's called chronic ART, CRT or ART. So in the first paragraph, as you see here, our finding, the hazard ratio in this prospective cohort study was we compared patients who were treated with ART with those without. This was before the introduction of the ART, so we had some data. So we compared it, and we had seen that, and the main finding was that mortality rate had declined by 65%, and we also saw that giving HIV treatment has led to 90% reduction in TB incidence. So by the way, this was one of the earliest findings that we reported. It was not reported in a very high impact journal, but this is one of the impactful studies, so I really like it. So that's why I brought it. So we summarize our key findings here. So you don't see any confidence interval, not many figures here. And we also here state that most of these deaths occurred within the first 3 months of treatment, and side effects were not very common. See, so these are the key findings. And then we have here what we did was we have written the implications of these main findings. We are talking about the nature of the study, that we did this study under routine conditions. We did this study in a typical district hospital in Ethiopia. And so we are now giving some interpretation of what these results really mean. And then we went into comparing with other studies on mortality. So we say that our results are consistent with other findings, both in terms of reducing mortality and TB incidence. The implications were already continued, so there has been some misalignment of these indicators anyway. And then we compared them, and we continued with the comparison. This mortality literature comparison continues because it was longer. And then we went to the limitations and changes. So we mentioned about some of the limitations. One of the limitations that in this study was that we did this study in a district hospital where there was no CD4 test at that time. So we just used the WHO's minimum recommendation. So that's why we put this as a limitation. But at the same time, we are showing that this is also one of the strengths, because ours was close to the routine service. So by the way, this paper was used as one of the papers that supported, the basis for recommending early treatment for patients and also TB preventive treatment and others. So this was a very impactful manuscript. And then we compared the TB incidence literature was one of the key findings. So we continued comparing it, and then we concluded it with this paragraph, and we made some recommendations not only for further studies, but we also made some recommendations for strengthening TB prevention efforts during the scale-up of TB treatment programs. So this is an example of how you can use this structuring of the discussion section. And remember that the discussion is a highly structured section of the manuscript, and it has 5 key features that I described a bit earlier. Thank you very much.